Clara Locke first saw the house on a gray March afternoon, when the neighborhood was still brittle with salt and thawing snow. The place was shabby but inexpensive, a narrow Queen Anne set back from the street behind an iron fence stippled with rust. It came with quirks, warped floorboards, a roof that would need replacing soon, and an abundance of old mirrors the landlord insisted couldn't be removed because they were historically significant. Clara, an archivist by profession, liked the idea of living among antiques. Her partner Martin, a carpenter, liked the idea of a project. The mirrors, 13 of them in total, ranged from a gilt monstrosity in the foyer to a shaving glass nailed above the basement sink. On the day they signed the lease, Martin tapped one of the beveled frames appreciatively and joked that with so many opportunities to check their reflections, they'd never lose track of themselves. For the first few weeks, the mirrors were simply background. They caught sunlight, doubling the kitchen's brightness, and added depth to the cramped upstairs hallway. Clara propped canvases against them when she unpacked, and Martin draped jackets over the ones he meant to polish, for someday, when he had the time. They hosted a modest housewarming, string lights, cheap wine, friends who laughed at the eccentric decor. "It feels like a fun house," their friend Lita said, spinning before the parlor pier glass. Martin seized the moment to recount the Victorian superstition that mirrors captured souls. Clara responded with a folklorist's tidbit about covering mirrors after a death so spirits wouldn't get trapped. They toasted to old stories and new beginnings and, for a while, believed the house would hold only benign secrets. The first incident came quietly. Clara woke near dawn, thirsty, and padded to the hallway bathroom. The nightlight's dim glow exposed her reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. Hair mussed, robe askew. Nothing extraordinary, except for Martin, standing behind her. At least, a version of him. His eyes were bloodshot, his lips peeled into a snarl she'd never seen in real life. He shouted, though the room remained silent. Then, as if cut from a film, that angry Martin raised his arm. A glittering flash suggested metal. Clara jerked around. The bathroom was empty. Her body trembled so fiercely she sloshed water from the glass she'd just filled. She told herself it was a waking dream, residue of exhaustion in the shadowy bathroom. When Martin shuffled up 10 minutes later, worried by the noise, she hugged him fiercely and said nothing. Days passed. Clara tried to forget the hallucination, but a prickle followed her whenever she neared the upstairs mirrors. She began to drape towels over them, claiming she didn't like fingerprints, and Martin teased her for turning the house into a séance parlor. Then, late one Sunday, he was installing shelves in the study while Clara cataloged family photographs at her desk. He glanced at the old cheval glass leaning against an oak beam and froze. There he and Clara were. Mid-argument, one that hadn't happened yet. His reflection pointed accusingly, shouted words he couldn't hear, while Clara's reflected face contorted with fury. She shoved him hard. He shoved back, harder. Martin whipped around, half expecting contact, but in the real room Clara still worked peacefully. A screwdriver slipped from his hand and clinked on the floor. Clara looked up, concerned, but Martin only muttered that his eyes were tired. By the end of April, both had experienced enough mirror visions to abandon doubt. The images always depicted future quarrels, each more vicious than the last. Some glimpses arrived a day before the real fight, some a week, but they never failed to manifest. It was as though the house, or whatever possessed the glass within it, enjoyed presenting a trailer for their worst moments. The first prophecy to come true was harmless. Martin forgetting to pick Clara up from the train station, Clara flinging her tote bag in irritation. When the incident happened exactly as previewed, they chalked it up to coincidence. The second was darker. Martin laughing at a mistake in Clara's grant proposal, Clara hurling a mug that shattered against the fridge. They hadn't believed they could behave like that, yet the mirror said they would, and then they did. Predictability did not grant power, it bred dread. They tried foreknowledge as a remedy. Martin apologized in advance for slights he hadn't committed. Clara resolved not to raise her voice about money. But inevitability held firm. The more they obsessed, the more tension tightened. Each peak sustained rage. The foyer mirror flashed them wrestling over a set of car keys. The attic glass showed Clara smashing Martin's guitar. The basement sink reflected Martin slapping Clara so hard she collapsed among detergent bottles. Between visions, they treated each other like unexploded ordnance. Their conversations shrank to logistics. They slept back to back, listening for the house's creaks, wondering which of them would fail first. Desperation bred research. Clara combed municipal archives for deaths in the property. Martin refilled his coffee 3 times while scouring occult forums. A story emerged. In 1904, the original owners, Nathaniel and Bess Whittier, had engaged in a famously grisly murder-suicide. Neighbors claimed the Whittiers' arguments were reflected in their lavish mirrors, as though the silvered surfaces rehearsed evil. Afterward, superstitious inheritors refused to remove or replace the glass, fearing it held the couple's violent echo. Clara read the century-old newspaper clipping aloud. Mrs. Whittier was found stabbed, Mr. Whittier hanged in the stairwell, and the words felt like a coda awaiting repetition. Martin slammed the laptop. "We're not them," he insisted, but his knuckles whitened against the table. They considered moving. Yet breaking the lease meant losing several months' rent, plus savings already poured into repairs. Pride, too, resisted. Quitting the house felt like surrendering to superstition, so they tried to neutralize the mirrors instead. Martin draped sheets, only to find them fallen, neatly folded on the floor by morning. Clara sprayed the surfaces with paint used for filming one-way glass, but the lacquer slid off by dusk as though licked away. Finally, Martin carried the smallest mirror outside and smashed it into the driveway. A thunderclap bellowed from a cloudless sky. Splinters sliced his palm. Every intact mirror in the house vibrated like struck drums. The glass he'd shattered reassembled itself overnight, reappearing on its nail without fracture. Bandaged and shaken, Martin accepted that destruction would not save them. In early May, they experienced a mirror scene unlike the others. This time, the parlor pier glass displayed not a quarrel, but a culmination. Clara pinned against the fireplace mantel, blood seeping through her blouse. Martin held a claw hammer, his face an alien mask of grief and mania. His reflection staggered backward afterward, dropping the hammer, collapsing to his knees. Clara screamed, fled the room, and vomited into the kitchen sink. Martin found her there and, in a trembling voice, promised never to harm her. She believed him, yet feared the certainty woven into the silver backing of their reflections. For the next week, she avoided him, leaving at dawn and returning after dark, eating microwaved meals alone while he worked late in the garage. The house felt cavernous with avoidance. One humid Tuesday, they both stayed home due to torrential rain that flooded the streets. Trapped, they attempted conversation in the living room. The topic was innocuous, Martin's sister's upcoming wedding, yet quickly soured over seating arrangements. Clara felt the conversation tilting toward fated anger. She stood to exit, but Martin, wanting resolution, blocked her path. That single gesture aligned too perfectly with the hallway mirror's earlier preview. Clara panicked and shoved him. Martin, shocked, caught his balance, yet in the mirror he was already retaliating. In the real world, he forced his hands behind his back like a penitent, whispering, "I won't. I love you." Clara fled upstairs and locked the bedroom door. Below, rain hammered the windows like an audience demanding climax. Fear mutated into obsession. Clara taped schedules beside every mirror, noting the date and time of previews, cross-referenced against reality. Martin built a plywood box over the cheval glass to trap visions inside. Some nights they slept in different rooms, because the mirrors showed an argument triggered by insomnia at 2:14 a.m. Other nights they stayed awake together, determined to perform gentleness when the appointed minute arrived. Once, at 11:07 p.m., They sat on opposite ends of the couch and recited childhood memories instead of insults. Still, the hallway mirror captured the ghostly overlay of them screaming. It seemed their actual behavior no longer mattered. The house had locked onto a single timeline, and they were puppets whose strings merely slackened before tightening. The worst premonition appeared on the 1st of June. In the foyer glass, Clara saw herself hacking at Martin with a kitchen knife, his forearm shredded as he fended her off. He pushed her down the staircase, then staggered after her, finishing the job with the knife he'd wrested free. Blood sheeted the varnished steps. Both versions of them wept. The forecast lasted perhaps 15 seconds, but scarred deeper than hours of therapy could mend. They decided the only safe choice was total separation until they could leave the house for good. Martin borrowed his brother's pickup and moved into a motel. Clara took an air mattress to her colleague's spare room. They returned only in daylight together to gather belongings, each time careful not to look at the mirrors. By month's end, nearly everything was packed except a few boxes in the attic and the furniture too cumbersome to move before their lease terminated on July 15th. On July 12th, the landlord texted that prospective tenants would tour over the weekend and requested the couple tidy remaining items. Clara and Martin agreed to meet Saturday morning, clear the attic, then treat themselves to brunch. Neutral territory. The day dawned clear, the heat already oppressive. Clara arrived first, opened windows for circulation, and brewed iced coffee while waiting. She allowed herself one glance at the parlor mirror. Nothing but her anxious, perspiring self. She felt relief so sharp it was dizzying. Maybe the house, sensing their departure, had surrendered. Martin was late. He texted apology. Traffic nightmare, 30 minutes. Clara carried boxes downstairs to kill time. Each trip took her past the nested cluster of mirrors printed along the hallway. She refused to look, focusing instead on steady breaths, on the weekend ahead. On her third trip from the attic, her shoe caught a warped board. She pitched forward, scattering photo albums. A mirror at the landing clanged as something struck it. When Clara sat up, pain buzzing through her knee, she saw a fracture zigzagging across the glass. Someone, the future Martin from earlier visions, stood on the other side. He held the claw hammer again. This time, though, he wasn't threatening her. He was swinging the tool toward his own reflection, smashing it pane by pane like a man destroying cages. Clara watched, hypnotized, as his image shattered silently. Then her phone pinged. Another text from Martin. Pulled over. Overheated radiator. Might be an hour. Adrenaline urged her to flee, yet curiosity moored her. She limped downstairs into the foyer, where the pier glass waited. In it, she did not see herself. She saw the same future Martin, breathless from violence, staring straight at her as though the mirror had become a window across time. He mouthed words she'd learned to lip-read during so many mute prophecies. "Get out!" Clara backed away, heartbeat pounding. She grabbed her purse, keys, and bolted through the front door. The July air felt scalding, reality too bright. She drove to a cafe 2 miles away, ordered water, and sat trembling. Each minute stretched. She tried Martin's phone. Voicemail. Tried again. Still voicemail. After 30 minutes of no response, fear eclipsed caution. She returned to the house. The front door stood ajar. Inside, no sound except the low hum of the refrigerator. "Martin," she called. Silence. She ascended the stairs, dread dragging at her limbs. The cracked hallway mirror lay in shards on the floorboards. No other mirror reflected anything abnormal. Only dusty halls. She found Martin in the attic, kneeling beside an open box of her grandmother's quilts, tears stricken across his cheeks. His hands were empty. No hammer. He looked at her like a drowning man glimpsing shore. "I saw something on the way here," he whispered. "In the side mirror of the truck. You, bleeding." He swallowed hard. "I came in and tried to break every mirror. Only one shattered, then I lost my nerve." Clara knelt across from him, careful of glass that glinted among rafters. She reached for his hand, remembered prophecies of knives and blows, and instead placed her palm flat on the floor. "We have to finish," she said. "Now, take what we can carry and never come back." They descended with quilts and a duffel of tools. In the foyer, they paused before the pier glass, the oldest, largest, the rumored witness to the Whittier's final hours. Its surface looked calm, faintly dusted by afternoon sun. Then a flicker. Two shapes within, indistinct but familiar, engaged in an argument they weren't currently having. The shapes sharpened. Clara brandishing a screwdriver, Martin grappling for her wrist. Clara felt a half-second temptation to watch, to note details for avoidance. But Martin barked, "Don't." He seized the gold frame and tilted the massive thing forward. Clara jumped to help. Together they wrestled it off the wall, staggered across the entry rugs and out onto the porch. The frame was heavier than expected, an amalgam of wood and plaster and century-old gilt. They carried it down the front steps, across the brittle lawn, and into the backyard where a small fire pit lay unused. Martin fetched lighter fluid from the garage. Clara's rational mind insisted that burning glass was futile, that the mirror would restore itself by dawn, but fury and terror overrode logic. They laid the pier glass flat on cinders, doused it, and stepped back. Martin flicked a match. Flame licked the gilt edges, coughed black smoke. The mirror's surface clouded, blistered, then cracked loudly enough to send sparrows flying from the fence. Within the fractures, Clara saw not reflections but roiling shadows, as if the mirror's usual show had lost its projector. Heat pressed their faces. They stumbled away, watching until the frame sagged and the silver backing peeled like sunburnt skin. A wind rose abruptly, scattering embers. The other mirrors inside the house began vibrating, a faint sonic hum they felt in their molars. Windows rattled, the iron fence clanged. Clara shouted over the din, "Leave it, car!" They sprinted to the driveway. Mirrors along the hallway flashed through open curtains, scenes of carnage skipping like a malfunctioning film reel. As Martin started the engine, Clara swore she saw Bess Whittier's spectral figure in the cracked bathroom glass, smiling with relief, or perhaps defeat. They drove until the house disappeared behind bends of suburban road, until their lungs tasted clean, mirrorless air. At a gas station they stopped, shaking, and inspected themselves in a convex security dome mounted above the register. Only two exhausted people stared back. No previews, no silent violence, just present reality. Martin placed his hand on Clara's shoulder and asked if she wanted to keep driving west, maybe as far as the mountains. She nodded. That night they slept in the motel Martin had formerly occupied, sharing a bed beneath a television bolted to the wall. The bathroom mirror was small and harshly lit. They draped a hand towel over it without comment. In the morning, they checked the news. No mention of fires at their old address. No property damage calls. Nothing. Clara imagined the house standing intact, mirrors restored, waiting. She pictured future tenants glimpsing soft distortions out of the corner of an eye, then looking closer and seeing two strangers, Clara and Martin, dragging a giant mirror through a weed-choked yard toward nascent flames. Some loops, she decided, save themselves by bursting. Martin opened the curtains, revealing a parking lot sunrise smeared in pink and orange. "Breakfast?" he asked. His voice was raw but steady. Clara slipped on her shoes, and they stepped outside together, their shadows sprawling across asphalt. In the stainless steel door of a vending machine, they caught their reflections. Small, imperfect, startlingly alive. They looked at each other instead. For the first time in months, neither of them wondered what would happen next.